Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about how to get and retain students with the PREPLY methodology. Okay, perfect. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about how to ensure your profile stands out, how to prepare rather than despair for your first lesson, efficient techniques for busy tutors. We'll talk about how to nail your first lesson, and we'll talk about how to help your student build their learning habits. So those are the main things that we're going to cover today. So we're going to get right in. So ensure your profile stands out. That's the first thing that we're going to discuss. And in talking about this, I'm going to be referring a lot to a ladder analogy. So I'm going to explain what this means because I'll be using this framework as we go. So if you think of your profile as a ladder, your students start off at the bottom. And the thing about a ladder is that you can't really skip any rungs or steps on the ladder. You have to go up one by one. And so when we think about the relationship between someone who's brand new on Preply and looking for a tutor, all the way to the point where it's a regular student who continues to buy packages, that's someone who's far up the ladder. So we're going to approach your profile in a step by step way, starting with the first thing that your student sees, knowing that that's the foundation for everything that comes after. So, for example, your video is hugely important. You probably know that. But if your photo isn't any good and your headline doesn't make sense, then they're never even going to get to see your video. So, we want to start with the things that are happening at the bottom levels of the ladder, and then we're going to work our way up. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going to be approaching this from. So, the first thing that we start with on our ladder is the photo, because when someone looks for a tutor on Preply, Preply does a really good job of making the photos large and bright. So, the first thing that you see is a photo. And of course, we're visual more than anything. So, we're going to look at the photo first. So, someone who's quickly scrolling through, if you don't have a good photo, they might just scroll right past you. You want to have your photo something that they're going to be able to stop and pay attention to. So that means a couple of things. Number one, and maybe this sounds obvious, but it's so important. It means smile. You've got to smile for your photo. Some people are self-conscious. Don't be self-conscious. Just smile. You want to be looking at the camera. You want to have yourself like nice and framed, looking at the camera, and you want it to be close up. So it's so important because sometimes people have like these profile photos where they're like, looking off to the side and they're smiling like this. Like, don't be afraid. Don't be self-conscious. Like, really get right in that frame of the camera and like really be smiling. And even if you think it looks cheesy, it might look cheesy. Yeah, that's it's possible. It may look cheesy. But even if it looks cheesy, it's still going to be helpful for getting students. It's going to be way better than something that you maybe think you'd look good, but it's not close up or it's not looking at the camera. You want it to be bright. Make sure that we can see your face. And again, this stuff, it really sounds super obvious. But when I looked at teachers on Preply, I was really surprised at how many photos weren't following these things. So just take another look at your photo, make sure you're doing these things with it. Okay. The next step is the headline. So if someone looks at your photo, the next thing that they're going to do is they're going to look over and they're going to see your headline. And what is the headline? So the headline, when you're making your Preply profile, is this thing where it's you have your language and then it says the headline, and the example that it gives you is certified IELTS tutor with 9 years of experience. So the thing about this is this example headline is about you, but I suggest that you make your headline less about you and more about your student. Now, this is something that I'm going to be talking about quite a bit as we move through today's webinar. So instead of saying something like, this is me, this is my qualification, a good thing to say might be this. This is what I wrote: communicate confidently at work. Now, that sounds like more like a headline. So when someone is looking at my photo and they see my face, the next thing they're going to see is what I'm telling them I'm going to do for them. I'm going to help you communicate confidently at work. So that's the important thing about the headline. You want to use the headline and take that as an opportunity to communicate your biggest benefit. So, whatever the biggest benefit is, whatever the thing is that is most important that you're promising for your students, that's what you want to put on your headline. Okay. So, if they look at your photo, that's the first step on the ladder. And then, okay. Then they look at your headline, that's the next step. Then the next step on the ladder is the video. And the video, I mean, this is really huge. This kind of gets its own title section because the video is just, and I mean, you can probably imagine a video is just tremendously important. The video is huge. It, I say here, nothing can change your fortunes like a good video, because if your video is high quality, it will be the best asset that you have for getting more students. If your video is not high quality, then you could be the best teacher in the world and have all the qualifications and experience and really just be wonderful and help your students so much. But if you don't have a quality video, it is not going to attract students. We really want to see, as students, we really want to see good videos. So that means don't be afraid to spend some time on it. It takes a little bit of time. So because video is hard, and because as teachers, we are not necessarily geared toward making good videos, a lot of teachers feel like, oh gosh, this video is so hard and I don't know how to do it and I just don't like it, so I'm just going to get it over with. So I see so many teacher videos where they're concentrating so hard. And when you concentrate, what kind of face do you make? You make like this face and you're thinking, your eyebrows are furrowed and you're frowning. That is not the impression that you want to be giving toward your students. And they just do one take and they look and they read off their screen and they say, hello, my name is Chris and I am an English teacher. And that's that. So because the video is so important, because it has so much potential to help get you students, don't be afraid to spend time on it. Don't be afraid to do a few takes. Like sit down, relax, do what you need to do to get comfortable, do a couple of takes. And as you do a couple of takes, you'll relax because often it's that third or fourth take where you'll really start to feel more comfortable with what you're saying. You'll realize you could say something in a different way that's more effective, much better than just doing it once. Aza says, that's so true. Many of my students tell me they chose me for my video. I I totally agree. I hear that all the time. Elitza says videos are extremely important, and most students make decisions on a specific tutor by reviewing the video. I know the video can be time consuming to create, but it's totally worth it. I 100% agree. Your video is your most important asset. And so when you're talking about Preply, if you're using Preply as an income source, you really can think of your video as one of the most primary drivers of students and therefore income. So it's just so important. Even if you don't like it, even if you're new to it, take the bull by the horns, so to speak. Don't be afraid. Just kind of got to kind of get into that world. Now, that being said, that the next thing that you really should keep in mind with your video is either edit or memorize it. You don't have to do both, but I definitely highly, highly recommend you do one or the other, because eye contact is incredibly important. I mean, even on this webinar, right? I mean, you would probably really start to get bored if I didn't make eye contact with the camera. If I just made it obvious that I was reading off of something and not looking. And people make their videos by reading on their screen, but you can tell. You can tell when they're not looking, and that's coming up again. We're going to mention that again later. But even more important than memorizing it would be to edit it. There are really great free editors for both Windows and Mac, and they don't require a big learning curve. It's pretty simple. You could probably get most of it done even if you're new in the course of like one weekend. And when I made my video, I cut out all the times I looked away. I cut out all the times I said and I didn't memorize it. I had my piece of paper, my script, and I just had it right here, and I would just read my sentence and I would look at the camera and say, hi, I'm Chris, business English teacher. And then I'd look at it again and say, I've been teaching online since 2012. And I just cut out all the in between parts. So if you look at the editor, it's like a bunch of slices. But when you put it all together, it looks great. So let's ask, what editors would you recommend? Keep it simple. So I use a Mac. And because I use a Mac, I use the one that comes on Macs, iMovie. It does a great job. With Windows, I know that some Windows, I don't know if they still make Windows Movie Maker. If they do, I would just use that. But also there's one that I've heard is similar to iMovie called VideoPad. And VideoPad is a Windows program and it's free. And that's why, like, you don't have to pay somebody to do this. You don't have to buy expensive software. And honestly, even YouTube has a really good editor now. So now, and I've never really experimented with this, but you might be able to do the kind of simple edits I'm talking about, where you cut out when you say you probably can do those simple edits on YouTube. So I don't know, someone double check that, but it doesn't have to be complicated. But because it's so important, please spend some time on it. I promise you, it will be worth your effort. Okay, so let's talk about what to say in your video, because a lot of times, you get in front of the camera and you freeze up and you're nervous and you're like, well, what am I going to say? Well, the first thing that you should say is talk about your student first and yourself second. Because when we make these profiles, we kind of get into this idea, this is my profile and it's about me. And if a student is going to choose me, it's going to be based on my qualifications and my experience. But that's not really accurate. We have to think of it back on the ladder, right? So if the student is just taking a couple steps on the ladder, they might have they might be on step 3 of the video with 10 or 20 different tutors. I know if I was looking for a tutor, I wouldn't just pick the first one I saw. I would want to watch a bunch of videos. So when I'm watching a bunch of videos, at this point, I'm so low on the ladder, I'm not interested yet in the tutor's training and qualifications. I'm more interested in what the tutor can do for me. So when you're doing this, when you're making this video, before you say, I've been teaching this many years, I have this certification, the more important thing to say is speak directly to your student, is to say, hey, student, I can help you with these problems. Do you have these problems? If these are the problems you have with language, I can help you. And I can help you by this and this and this. So by showing students you have a plan, by making your promise to them, by making your chief message of, if this is where you are and this is where you want to be, I can help you get there. And you can define those things based on what your teaching style is and who you like to teach. That's going to be a much more powerful message than talking about yourself. Now you can talk about yourself, but that should be at like the end of the video. At the end of the video is that's when you can include that kind of information. But the first thing you say should be about the student and what you're going to do for them. Remember that learning a language is a means to an end. Very few people learn languages for fun. And even the people who learn languages for fun usually learn languages for the fun of speaking it, not usually for the fun of doing grammar exercises and studying vocabulary. So when you are making your video, one of the most important messages you can convey to your student is connecting what you're going to be teaching them to what their language goals are. So, for example, maybe your student wants to move to an English speaking country. Maybe your student needs English for a promotion at work. Maybe your student needs to study for an advanced degree and needs to get a certain IELTS score. Whatever the case may be, by speaking to those goals, that's going to be a much more powerful message than just saying, I'm going to help you get better in your grammar. If you say, I'm going to help you get into that university that you've been studying for, that's something that's going to be really a powerful thing, and it's going to make someone want to take action. So I would recommend going that route if you can. Share what makes you special as a teacher. And when I say what makes you special as a teacher, I am not talking about your qualifications or experience. You have something that is special about you, something that's unique about your personality, something that makes you special as a teacher. That's what you want to communicate in your video, because you want to be yourself. You don't want the video to be the same as everybody else's. Hello, this is what I do, whatever. You want to be special. Inject your personality. If you don't know what makes you special as a teacher, ask a student, what do you like about me? What's the reason you chose me? They'll be able to tell you. Even if you don't have any students, ask your friends. You know who can always tell you what makes you special? Your mother. So no matter what you're doing, you'll have a person who can say, Chris, what I really like about you is the way that you can take really complex material and break it down into a way that's really simple so that anybody can understand it. Wow, that's a great thing to say in a video. So if you say, take whatever it is about you that makes you special, put that in your video, that's going to be more important than your qualifications and your experience. Alyssa says, no student wants to learn a language for the sake of learning. It is good to understand the student's end goal. Absolutely. And we're going to continue to talk about that when we talk about the first lesson. But understanding your students' goals is tremendously important because that will help you make what you teach as relevant as possible. So just like when I started this webinar, I wanted to know how long you've been teaching online, how long you've been on Preply. Knowing that helps me make what I'm sharing more relevant for you. And so for you, knowing those details about your student helps you make your teaching more relevant. So, and ultimately, it's just going to be more effective. They're going to learn the language faster if you can connect it and motivate your student by connecting it to their goals. Two things to avoid in your video. So these are two things not to say. The first thing that you should not say is, I'm a language learner too, so I understand. Now, that may be true and it's valid, but the problem is that so many people say it. And so because so many people say it, it loses meaning. So I would say that that's not only not necessary, I would skip that if you are making your video. Other thing I would not say, and this is the only other thing I would say to avoid, is to say, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Because even though what you think you're saying is you think you're saying, we're going to have totally customized lessons. What your student hears when you say that is, well, you don't have a plan. Like the student, most students will not come to you with a detailed plan that says, okay, Chris, teacher, I want to learn about this, and then I want to learn about this, and then I want to learn about this, and I just need your help. Most students are going to come to you and they're going to be like, hey, teacher, I know I want to get better, so help me. And what will really communicate powerfully to them is if you say to them, I've got a plan and this is what we're going to do. And the Preply methodology makes that really easy, which we're going to talk about coming up. So that's the general thing about what to say. If you have any questions about what to say, put them in the chat. I'll get to them. So I don't want to get too deep into this, but those are some rough guidelines. Now, I want to talk about what to do. So what to do, just like when you were taking your photo, look at the camera on the video. Gosh, it's so important. So many videos are people looking at their screen. And even though from my distance, from my screen to my camera is like an inch, that's huge as you get close to the camera. So if I'm reading, you can tell that I'm reading. You can see it. It's so obvious. And it just is so much more powerful if you look at the camera. So that's why I said earlier, either edit or memorize. If you memorize it, you can just look right at the camera and really talk like it's a person there. Or if not, just edit it and cut out the times when you're going to read your next sentence and before you look back at the camera. Right. Look at the camera, not near the camera. So that's kind of what the point that I'm making here. The next thing is about your demeanor. Be authentically excited. So the analogy that I like to use for this is you have the best news, such you just received great news and you just can't wait to share it with your best friend in the world. How would you be? So there's no need to be inauthentic. There's no need to be a person that you're not. If you're a bubbly personality, then be bubbly. If you're a more serious personality, then be serious. But whatever authentically excited means for you, that's how you should try to be on the camera. And like maybe that means you call up your best friend. Like you set everything up for your camera, you get ready to make your video, and then you call your best friend and you're like, hey, what's up? Ha ha ha. Have a great chat. Oh my gosh, it's so great to talk to you. Okay, bye. And then when you hang up, you're going to be like in this much more relaxed place. And that's the energy that you want to bring to your video. So you have great news, you can't wait to share it, and you're about to share it with your best friend in the world. Whatever that means for you, be that on the video. Next thing is practical. Sit in front of a window. So lighting is such a tricky thing, and if you go on YouTube, you how to set up lighting, and you can find all of this stuff to buy and learn for hours about whatever. Look, I would just say if you sit in front of, this you see how bright my face is? I've got a window. It's a cloudy day. If it were sunny, I would have more light in here. It's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about it. Don't get crazy. Your background is important, but it's not hugely important. Don't make anything too distracting. This is more common sense, but more important than your background is lighting on your face. If a student can't see you, they're not going to want to choose you. Last thing with your video, this is the minimum thing that you should edit. The absolute minimum thing you should edit is your thumbnail. Your thumbnail is this is what you see. So what you should do, so this screenshot that I took, this is a screenshot directly from Preply. So if I were going to do this again, I would edit this so that this thing wasn't covering my face at all. So editing your thumbnail is really easy. All I had to do was take a screenshot of a still from my video, and then I put this little text box up here: learn business English on Preply with Chris. But a lot of times, so here's the thing about a thumbnail: YouTube will randomly choose a thumbnail from your video. And often it's not at a point where you're smiling. Often it'll be at a point where your eyes are closed and your mouth is open. So when someone hovers over your profile on Preply, and when they hover over your profile in the list, and it brings up this image that I'm sharing, a lot of people are like this. It's it's avoidable and it's an easy fix. Or people's face will be completely covered up by that play button. And it's just a little thing, but it's such an easy thing. You could get a photo where you're like a little bit off to the side, where you're looking at the camera, where you're smiling. The text box bonus, not necessary. But if you make it so that you're looking at the camera, that your face isn't covered up, and that you're smiling, do that. You don't have to have any image editing abilities whatsoever. All you need to really know how to do is take a screenshot. If you know how to take a screenshot, then you have all of the video editing skills that you need to be able to give yourself a better thumbnail when you upload the video. Okay, so far we've talked about the ladder. So let's look at where we've come so far. Bottom step is the photo. So if they see your photo, they'll decide whether or not they're going to hover over your profile. If they hover over your profile, they'll see the headline. If they like the headline, the next thing they'll see is the video. And I put the video above the text because I think most people are going to click play and play the video right from that screen, because when you click on the video, it like opens in front of everything. It doesn't even take you to the teacher profile. To go to the teacher profile, you have to click again, and that's where you see the text. So in talking about the text, a couple of things I want to bring up. First, everything I said about the video applies. Talk about your student first and yourself second. Remember that learning a language is a means to an end, and share what makes you special as a teacher. These are the same bullets I made for the video. They 100% apply to the text too. For reference, this is my text. So just to kind of show you how I structured this, the first thing I'm doing is talking to the student. And more than just talking to the student, the very first thing that I'm doing is I'm typing the students that are going to work for me. So I'm not trying to be everything to everybody. I'm talking to a very specific audience. If you are a professional, if you need English for work, and despite your level you can't express yourself, you're in the right place. If you've had lesson materials that seem too easy, or if there's a level you can't reach no matter how much time you spend, you're in the right place. If you're dealing with an interview or meetings or presentations in English, you're in the right place. So you'll notice I don't say anything about me in the first paragraph, and I don't even say anything about the lessons. The whole first paragraph is specifically devoted to, are you the right student for me? And if you're not the right student for me, if these things don't apply, the student's going to move on, and that's okay, because the students that it does apply to, they're going to go, ooh, this is me. And they're going to read the rest of my profile with much greater interest. So the rest of it, you can see my profile and you've probably already read it instead of listening to me. But this is the important thing when you want to put this on your profile. Here's a super tip. And I didn't include this. On Preply, the little blurb displays 2.5 lines. So when someone is looking through the teacher listings, it's going to show 2.5 lines. So my thing probably gets cut off at the word spent. So if I really wanted to do this super, I would tailor my first 2.5 lines so that it ended at the end of a sentence. And I would really spend a whole lot of time on those 2.5 lines, because those 2.5 lines are what is going to determine if the person clicks to see the rest of your profile. So when you're writing it, don't just write it. Don't just say, I gotta have this, so let me just type something. Really think about it. Think about what message you want to send to your students. Think about what you want to tell them, and really spend a lot of time on those first 2.5 lines, because those first 2.5 lines are way more important than anything else that is on this profile text. Okay, awesome. Next thing, and I said this already, don't try to be everything to everyone. So on preferred student age and preferred level of students, I advise against clicking every single thing. Because if you do, if you click everything, and this section is huge, then your student gets the feeling like, well, I don't know if this is the teacher for me. Because I don't want, I mean, this is as a consumer, and we all kind of have this behavior. I don't want something that's made for everybody. I want something that's made just for me. We enjoy custom things. So don't feel bad like you're excluding. Really put the students that you want to work with. I mean, I have undergraduates, adults of all ages. I generally don't prefer teaching kids and teenagers. It's just not an age group that I enjoy teaching English so much. So I don't check those because I would be less effective as a teacher. Their learning would be less effective. And it lets the adults and undergraduates know, okay, this person's really specific focused on me. Same thing on the preferred level. A lot of people love working with beginners. I don't particularly enjoy working with beginners. I tend to get bored if I work with beginners. That's just me. So I say upper intermediate, advanced, and proficient. Most of my students are extremely high level, and we're talking about other things, and we're not worried so much about the grammar and everything else. That's me. You put the students that you really enjoy working with, the ones that are going to make you feel like you enjoy teaching. Alexa says it's hard. A big mistake is to be a tutor for everyone. Absolutely, don't be a tutor for everyone. It's not going to work. People will have the reaction that says this person isn't for me. It's hard to be able to teach kids at the same time to be able to teach business English. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's kid. I do business English. I don't do kids. Some people love teaching kids, and I get that. I totally get it. They're cute, and you don't have to prepare, and then fine. And if that's what you like, then put that. But just focus on what you like. Next thing, and don't try to be everything to everyone. So on Preply, on your Preply profile, you can put your specializations. Don't click them all. Don't click them all for the same reasons I just shared. The other thing is that for every one that you click, you put in a little blurb of text, just like with your headline. Don't put in on English for work. I have spent years in the business world. I know how to communicate English at work. Your potential student will say, well, that's nice, but what are you going to do for me? So here, the most important thing that you should put here is how you're going to help your student with with this specific thing. So English for work, whether it's vocabulary or small talk at events, you'll feel more comfortable. I'm making a promise. English job interview prep. Practice the most common questions, get tips, and gain the confidence you need to ace the interview. Again, I'm promising things. I'm using this opportunity to tell my student what I'm going to do for them more accurately, what they're going to get from our lessons, not how I do it, not why I'm qualified. That's less important. Prepare. Okay, that's section one, and that's the biggest one because it's so important. Any questions, guys, feel free to pop them into the chat. I'm happy to address them as I go. So let's talk about your preparation. So before I get into the preparation, I know that the Preply team has given a detailed guide, and so this is going to be, kind of following that along. That's got a lot of detail. I know that you have access to it. I definitely recommend you consult that. I'm going to be sharing this as following along, but from the perspective on how to get and retain your students. So preparing for the first lesson. Once a new student books a lesson with you, send a message to the student right away to introduce yourself, clarify goals, and inform the student that they'll receive a link to the placement test in the Preply methodology. Pre-lesson communication is key because when a student books a lesson with you, that's a huge step. It's easy to go to a website and browse teachers. That's easy, right? Anybody can do that. Like, how many things have you shopped for online that you haven't bought? So easy to do. It's a big step to actually take your money out and say, I'm going to pay for this. And yeah, Chris says no harm in over communicating. 100% true. So when your student books a lesson with you, they've got their money on the line and they're excited. It's like when I order something online from Amazon, well, I can't wait for it to get here. I check the tracking every single day. I want to know when my stuff is coming. So if your student books a lesson for 3 days in the future or 5 days in the future, and they hear nothing, it's like you're leaving them hanging a little bit. So communicate. You want to start this relationship from the moment that the student reaches out to you. The moment the student reaches out to you, reach out to them. Hey, nice to meet you. I'm excited. What are your language goals? Soon you're going to get a placement test, and just don't be afraid to get that relationship going. Okay, Ozza says, I noticed some students I send the placement test either found it long or just didn't work on it. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes they won't. You can't make them do it. And we'll talk about what to do if they don't. But sometimes they don't. One thing that I do is I sometimes don't assign the whole test, and that can reduce the time commitment on the student's behalf. But there could be other reasons for that, and maybe we'll get into some of that. Oh, Gasper says I'm going to tell them they get a certificate if they do it. That is a great idea. That's a great idea. Give them kind of an incentive. And the other thing that you can do is you can tell them that taking the placement test will help them get the most out of the lessons, because that's what the placement test is for. The placement test, does it help you as a teacher? Absolutely. But it helps you as a teacher because it tells you what the student really needs. So by communicating to the student the benefit that they're going to get out of it, and Gasper, and I'm sorry, I might be just totally mispronouncing your name, and I apologize if I am. But by telling them what their benefit is going to be for completing the placement test is going to give them a powerful reason to do it. Right, and so Elitza is giving examples of what they get: a gap analysis and a tailored learning plan. So if you can communicate this, here's the placement test. Once you complete this placement test, this is going to help you get the most out of the lessons, because you're going to get this analysis of all your mistakes, and it's going to create the learning plan that's going to help you fix those mistakes. Now, if you communicate that to your students right away, they're going to be a lot more likely to complete the placement test instead of, here's the link to take a placement test, right? No benefit is there. Okay, so then and then we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's okay because this is good. So then you are going to create the student's credentials and send the test. I'm not going to get into that so much unless I see someone in the chat tell me that I should. We've got detailed walkthroughs that are going to show you how to do that. On lesson day, you want to get yourself and get your technology ready. So that means the obvious things. Make sure your internet connection is good. Make sure you're in a quiet room. Make sure you're not going to get interrupted. Have a headset, please. Minimum, have a headset. I mean, even if it is the absolute least expensive headset in the world, as long as it has the little microphone, I mean, most smartphones, they come with these little guys, right? This is really all you need. You don't have to get fancy. You're welcome to get fancy. You probably can't see my hair does a good job of hiding it, but it will make such a big difference in terms of any interruptions, a knock at the door, the audio in the lessons. If you have the audio and no one's wearing a headset, there's going to be conflicting sounds. So you want to get yourself in a quiet place, make sure your technology is good, and get ready. So when it comes to be time for the lesson, you want to go over the test results. You definitely want to make sure you've seen the test results ahead of time before you meet the student, and send your student a message 15 minutes before the lesson, just saying, hey, we're going to start in 15 minutes. My colleague Chris says my Logitech headset was $20 and it's been fantastic. And I meet with Chris once a week, at least, probably twice a week. And the meetings are so much better because now I don't hear any of the background noise. Why? Because he's wearing a headset. And so from the student perspective, it makes a huge difference, especially if you're in a place with background noise. It's hard enough for the student to understand English, but if they are trying to compete with background noise, that's a whole different thing. Ashley says, I found that using the first lesson to get to know the student and their learning goals, introduce myself, and explain more about the placement test and curriculum has helped. Explaining on video and being able to elaborate and explain has had better results than simply sending a link before even talking with them on camera. That's been my experience. Totally, Ashley. So we're going to talk about that. It is ideal for both you and the student if they take the placement test before you meet. That's the best. It does not mean that you don't need to communicate about it during the lesson. You absolutely should, but definitely don't send a link. Definitely do communicate the benefits. But I would say the best case scenario is to have both. The student, you communicate the reasons for the placement test beforehand so that the student takes it, and then you really can get more into it when it's time for the lesson. DeLuca says, do you think it is suitable to send a placement test to a new student when the student is a beginner? I do, unless it's an absolute pure total beginner and you happen to know that. One thing about the test is that every question has an I don't know answer. So the student can always answer I don't know. Encourage your student not to guess, right? A lot of us, we have this thing where we feel like we want to, guess if we don't know. If your student clicks I don't know again and again, the test will end. So from that perspective, it is suitable for lower levels. And the only time it's not suitable is if you know that this student speaks zero English, right? That's the only situation where I would say it's not suitable. Otherwise, absolutely send it. Good questions. Okay, keep the questions coming. I'm happy to stop what I'm doing to address those. We're going to move on to part 3. Nail your first lesson. Okay, so I have the little ladder up another rung because, like I already said, this first lesson, when this is a big change, right? This is a big thing. This is like the hardest step on the ladder to take because most students on any website are not going to reach this rung. So when someone reaches this rung, like that's big. So that's how you know that if a student books a lesson, the student is serious, they really want to learn, they're looking for a teacher. So it's so important. And your first lesson will be before the video. The video was the biggest determination of, is the student going to continue or not? Okay, they saw your video, they liked it, they booked a lesson with you. Now your first lesson becomes this next really big moment where of a decision. Either the student's going to just do a one-off lesson, you never see or hear from them again, or they're going to take a second lesson, a third lesson, and as they do that, they get higher on the ladder and higher on the ladder. I've had one student for more than 2 years, and I mean, I know him so well, and we have a great relationship. And if we had the ladder, he would be like on the side of a castle climbing up. Um, it's because we've been able to nurture this relationship. And every time he wants to continue, we just have to find ways to kind of keep it going. I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're gonna talk about how to do more long term. But the first lesson is really this moment where it's gonna happen. So during the first lesson, super important, arrive early, log in, have the placement test results ready. So you want to have the placement test results in a separate tab so that you kind of already know what you're looking at and you're prepared for when the student gets there. So the first part of class, you want to get to know your students' pains and dreams. So I'm using this language and I'm putting it in quotes on purpose because going back to what I said earlier, students don't learn language for fun. Generally, they don't learn languages because they like studying vocabulary. Find out why your student is there. So I introduce myself. I say, hey, I'm Chris. I'm from Florida. I like to travel. Introduce yourself to me. Now I can hear them talk and get a first idea of how well they do that. And I say the very first thing, you're here for English. What's the problem with your English? Because if there were no problems with their English, they would not be here. So I want to find out what their problem is as they understand it. And so then my student's going to start talking. The student's going to say, I have a pronunciation issue and people don't understand me when I speak, and whatever it is. The first thing I want to know is to get to know what motivated my student to say, oh, this is a problem. I need to address it with the tutor. Okay, that's the first thing I want to do. Then I want to know my students' dreams. And by dreams, I'm saying, I mean by that, why do you want to improve your English? Because if you stay only on the level of language, it's going to be superficial. If you stay only on the level of what's your problem with English, pronunciation is bad. Okay, well, I'll help you with pronunciation. Why is pronunciation a problem? Let's get a little deeper into that. Why do you want to improve your pronunciation? Okay, you want to improve your English, you want to improve your fluency. Great. Well, why do you want to improve your fluency? Well, I want to get a promotion at work. Okay, that's much more important than I want to improve fluency. So take a couple of minutes and really find out, why the student is there, what's causing them a problem to seek you out, and what their ultimate goals are. Question, do you have any advice when a student approaches you with the desire to have only one lesson? For example, before an interview, so you know in advance they only want one lesson. Ever happened to you? Absolutely, it happens, especially because I say on my profile that I do English or I do interview prep. So when that happens, I mean, I just say that's fine. I mean, we'll do one lesson, and I'll try to help you get the most out of this that I can. So unless Alyssa wants to chime in here with anything else specific, my advice is to say, yeah, I mean, it does happen. It's not super common, but if it happens, then yeah, you just kind of help the student for that one goal with for the best that they can. Yeah. Aza, is it suitable to ask them if they studied English before and why it didn't work for them? Absolutely, it's suitable. It's 100% suitable, I think, because it's helpful information. So, because if you have been trying to do something and failing over and over again, well, why do you think that is? What has the problem been? I mean, I will ask my students if they have had other teachers, and why aren't you still with those teachers? And why am I asking that? Because if they say, well, my teachers always did this and I didn't like it, then I would say, okay, well, now I know that that's a thing that I don't want to do. So as much investigation as you want to do as to why their English is not at the level that they want, I think that's great. I ask if they had English lessons in school, university, here in PREPLY, etc. Totally, absolutely. I think those are all great questions because it's going to give you background and it's going to help you make your lessons more relevant to the student. Because if there's something that they're looking for in lessons and they haven't been able to get them yet, then you can be the one to give it to them. And you can only know what that is if you ask. So ask, be detective, ask. Like when someone goes to a doctor, right? If you go to a doctor, what does the doctor say? What are you eating? Have you been exercising? A doctor's got to ask a lot of questions before they make a diagnosis. How long have these symptoms been happening? Does it hurt when I touch here? That's what a doctor does, and a doctor does all of that so that they can make the best possible treatment plan. This is the same thing. You're going to ask them questions. Why don't you think this has worked for you? What else have you tried? And that's going to help you make a plan that fits the student, just like a treatment plan to help them improve as quickly as possible. Okay, that's the first part of class. Second part of class, go over some of the placement tests. So that's why you have their English, their placement test open in another tab so that you can go over some of this with them. Now, you don't have time to go over every single lesson. And even if you did have time, that's not what that first lesson is for. So you don't want to go over all of it. But a good place to start is with their lower level mistakes. So if I have someone who is, even if they're an intermediate, but they made early beginner mistakes, well, let's talk about those. And you want to talk about this with them for a couple of reasons. One, you want to show them, hey, look, this is a cool thing that I have that's showing me your learning plan. But also, it's showing you, is this relevant? Like, I don't necessarily need to teach them every single lesson. If they look at the mistake and they go, "Oh, that was a silly mistake. I don't know why I put that there." I know that the plural of knife is not knifes. I know that you drop the fe and change it to ves. And I'll say, okay, and I'll maybe ask them one other. I'm like, well, what's the plural of shelf? What's the plural of calf? And I'll ask them one or two others. And if they get it, then I know that this is not a thing that we need to spend a huge amount of time on. Okay, let's say answering the question about someone who's looking for one lesson at a time. So that's great. I'm not going to read that out loud. That's there in the chat, that you can see that. Okay, great. So the second part of the class, go over some of the placement tests. Third part of the class, choose a lesson and begin. This is important. You want to choose carefully. So if I have a student, I don't want to pick the easiest lesson because then they might say, oh man, this is too easy for me. I also don't want to say, we're going to talk about mixed conditionals because that's really complicated. And your student might feel like, oh boy, this English stuff is hard and I don't know if this is for me. The lesson you want to choose to do with your student is one that's more toward the beginner side, even if they're more advanced, but not the most beginner. And choose something that might be relevant. One that I love to do with students of all levels is I love to do the singular plurals, either regular, usually irregular. So there's a lesson in the methodology called irregular, singular, and plurals. And it often trips students up because they might make a mistake. There's a lesson on the placement test, like, that has something, I forget which one, maybe it's knives or something. But that's a great lesson to do. And it's a great lesson to do for a couple of reasons, because it's pretty easy. Even advanced students know it, but there's a couple of curveballs in there. So even with really advanced students, people who live in the United States, I might be like, what's the plural of shrimp? What's the plural of sheep? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And then they're like, is it So then you can kind of have fun with it. You're like, no, it's the same. You're like, what's the plural of mouse? Mice. What's the plural of house? You're like, it's houses, right? Right? Mouse, house. So you can have fun and play with these things, and you can yeah, people, Chris. Yeah, people make that mistake all the time. So you start with the easy ones. What's the plural of man? Most students are going to know that it's not mans. They're going to know it's men. Woman, women, child, children, person, people, feet, teeth. You start easy, and then you can get like really complex, right? Like dice. People don't know that the singular of dice is die, and I have fun with that too. Like, did you know that data is plural? Did you know that the singular of data is actually datum? And like that makes the student laugh, and it creates a positive experience. It also teaches them something new. So I love that lesson. So the moral of the story is choose carefully. Okay, and then you're gonna wrap up. You wanna do a summary of what you talked about. You wanna ask them if they have any questions, ask if they have any feedback on the lesson, and we're gonna pivot to this in the next part of what we're talking about. So keep questions coming. Help the student build their learning habit. That's number 4. This is the last big topic. We've been going for a while, so this is our last section. So this is really where you help the student continue up the ladder, right? And the ladder has no end. It goes forever. I mean, you always can be improving in your second language. So at the end of the first lesson, don't be afraid to ask if your student would like to continue taking lessons. Some people get really timid and they're like, I don't know what to say at the end. Don't be afraid to ask them if they want to continue, because here's how to think of it. You're not a salesperson, you're a coach. So you don't have to have any kind of adversarial relationship. I'm going to get a little sip of water. Excuse me. It doesn't have to be adversarial. You're a coach. And the nice thing about the coach and the player is that they're on the same team. They want the same thing. So when you have this conversation with your student, you're not having this from the perspective of I'm trying to sell you something. You're having this from the experience of I'm a coach of your English. I want you to have the best English that you can. If you feel like having the best English that you can will be with me, awesome. If you feel like having the best English that you can will be with somebody else, that's awesome too. But let's talk about it. Let's make a game plan. So from that perspective, you want to help your student make a game plan for language improvement. And there's a couple of things that we know about how to game plan for language improvement. We know that packages increase commitment. So if someone just buys one lesson at a time, what happens the first time they have a busy week? They forget. And just like with everything else, if you've ever tried to learn how to do a musical instrument or your own language learning, as soon as you get out of the habit, what happens? The whole thing falls apart. If you have a package, that means you're committed. If you're committed, you get better results. And more often means more effective, right? Like I tell students all the time, and I used to teach guitar, and I used to before I was an English teacher, and I would tell students this with guitar. It's better, more effective if you practice 5 minutes a day than an hour once a week, right? It's just better if you do smaller increments of time more frequently. So tell that with your students. I mean, that's just a fact. It's a fact that the more often you do something, the better that you'll get. It's also a fact that smaller increments of time more often are more effective than that same amount of time all done at once. So I tell my students this at the end of the lesson because we're talking about it in the context of how I'm going to help you get your English as effective as possible, as quickly as possible. So this is all from the perspective of helping the student go from being a one-time, one-lesson trial student to being a student that you teach on a regular basis. Now, let's talk about once you have a student. So once that student takes another step, oh, I've got some questions. Paul, the biggest problem I had is a C1 student going through a B1 lesson, especially when the lesson starts off with basic concepts with matching the pictures with text. Yeah, Paul, don't be afraid to skip. The lesson slides, move through the slides. So a lot of times, if someone has an error with a specific part of a grammar point, they might know the first part of the grammar point. So I would get on those slides, and if they're like, you get the feeling that this is not a challenge, that this is not the mistake that they made, skip ahead, skip on those slides. Don't worry about it. If it's not helpful for them, if it's too easy, fine. And I tell students, look, you may feel like it's too easy, but you made a mistake here. And I just want to make sure that you know this fully. So don't be afraid also if it seems too easy. If you do get that feeling, you can also skip. Alyssa, ask your students for feedback for the lesson. Check if they had different expectations, agree on a learning strategy that works for them. We all learn in a different way. Absolutely. We're going to talk about feedback in just a second. This is a good approach. Let's let the students feel more involved in the learning strategy as well. Absolutely. So once you have a student, keep it fresh. Okay, so keep it fresh means a couple of different things. The first thing that keep it fresh means is the learning plan. Once the student takes the placement test, the learning plan that gets generated will be all grammar. Now, that will help them fix their grammar, but it's not going to help them fix all the other parts of their language, of their English. So you want to add other parts into that learning plan. Mix in different lessons, other things at their level. The speaking lessons are great. So much interesting things to talk about in the speaking lessons. But there's listening lessons, there's reading lessons. Um, One thing that I feel like probably teachers don't use enough, just based on my observations, phrasal verbs and idioms. Everybody needs phrasal verbs. Everybody, does not matter what the level is. Everybody needs phrasal verbs, and idioms are fun. So keep it fresh. So what I do with my own students is I don't even stay in one lesson for the whole hour of our lesson. There's no rule that says you have to do that. We'll do one lesson for like 40 minutes, and then I will end that lesson. The student will be automatically taken back to their student screen, and I will launch a phrasal verb section lesson. And we'll do a phrasal verb lesson for 20 minutes. And they'll see the little green enroll button light up again, and they'll go right and they'll be into it. So you're talking about like 2 seconds of one lesson to another. And so one lesson will spend 20 minutes on phrasal verbs. The next lesson we'll spend 20 minutes on idioms. And come on, idioms are fun, right? The big cheese tough cookie. These are things that make you laugh with your student because the pictures are silly, and you look at it and you're like, do you ever use this? Have you heard this before? And they're like, oh yeah, I've heard that. No, I haven't heard that. It's a great conversation starter. So don't be afraid to mix in other lessons. Don't be afraid to explore the lesson library and do some idioms, do some phrasal verbs. Your students need it no matter what their level is, and it's gonna make it interesting, because if you just do the learning plan and don't modify it, it's only going to be grammar. And it would be like if you went to math class and you only ever did fractions. And like, yeah, you need to learn fractions and you have to spend a certain period of time in math class on fractions, but you're like, man, are we ever going to do anything but fractions? So especially if you transition to more long term, you got to keep it fresh. Next thing, get regular feedback. So if a student gets a package of lessons, let's say a student gets 5 lesson pack. I, in lesson number 4, will say, hey, how do you think things are going? How do you feel? Do you notice a difference? Do you feel more confident? What do you enjoy about these lessons? Is there anything you don't enjoy? Can we do more of something? Can we do less of something? That will be huge, because sometimes I've had this happen to me. I've had this happen where, like, I've been with a student and we're like, we're going to do the conditionals and we're going to do all the conditional lessons, and we're doing it. And I'm like, the student loves it. They love these conditionals. And we're having these great conditional lessons. And then I'll be like, hey, let's get the feedback. What do you think about these conditionals? And they're like, I think they're boring. And I was so surprised because I really thought that they were into it. So sometimes you just got to ask. So getting regular feedback, hugely important. Other thing, always give homework. Homework is like the bridge between the lesson today and the lesson next week. It communicates to your student that you care. And as teachers, or as students, as humans, we don't like it when things are unfinished, right? That's why websites have progress bars. You want to see the progress bar going. Things that are unfinished, they nag at you in the back of your mind. When you start getting bored, what's the first thing that you do when you're bored and you'd rather be somewhere else? You start thinking of all the things that you got to do that aren't done yet, right? So always give homework. Homework connects this lesson to the next lesson. Even if you don't finish a lesson, have homework ready to give. I have like 20 writing prompts that I just will say, boop, like, be ready. So if I'm in a situation where we're not finished with a lesson, and the homework from the lesson will be on the entire lesson, and I don't want them to do it because I want to make sure they've done all the homework first. I will be like, I want you to sit down and write for 20 minutes about, and the title is The Best Day of My Life. And that's the only direction you have. You have to write for 20 minutes, doesn't matter how long it is, no external resources, no dictionaries, no nothing. I just want you to write The Best Day of My Life. And gosh, students have written amazing things, and not just amazing English, like amazing stories. And I get to know them, and we have like interesting conversations about it. And I correct their writing. So always give homework, doesn't matter what it is. I do that. I ask for their feedback and see if I need to change anything about the lesson or if they feel that they need to improve or not, started to improve or not. Absolutely. Alyssa, I love this point. Tutors that send homework have 1.8 times more engaged students. Wow. Homework not always doesn't always mean fill in the gap exercises. You can ask them to listen to a podcast, TED Talk, etc., a topic of their interest. Absolutely. You can get creative with homework. One thing that I always say to students, and I do this very early on, is I ask my student, what are you interested in? You know, what makes you excited in general? Like, what are you interested in learning about? What are your hobbies? And that's the nice thing about podcasts. No matter what someone is interested in the world, there's a podcast about it. So no matter what, because that's what makes studying fun. And studying by nature is not fun. It helps us stick with things if the studying is interesting and it's fun. So I always try to connect the things that they enjoy doing on their own that they want to do anyway in English, because that's going to help them. Sending the PREPLY methodology homework as default only takes a click. Absolutely. Anytime you finish a lesson, send the homework. Sometimes we'll finish 2 lessons in one day. I send both homeworks. And even if they can't do them both, by the time we meet again, it's there for them. I'd rather give them too much than too little. Oh, solid go as direct follow on the lesson. Yep. Setting the deadline helps a bit because then I get an email to remind them. Good point. Yep. You can set the little deadline. Okay, good. So this is the last slide. Gosh, we've been here for 1 hour. We're at the Q&A. How exciting and good timing. Okay, awesome. Um, any questions, guys? I'm happy to answer your questions. I like the concept of retention. Yeah, me too. Me too. If I think about the student that I've had for 2 years, it's amazing. It's amazing that we've been working together for so long. It's tiring to keep doing first lessons. Yeah, it sure is. And it's easier. It's so much easier when, and you can just handle more students when you're a little further along in the process and they're a little higher up the ladder than if you just, you're doing, if you're having if you're constantly cycling through students, you have to keep sending the placement tests, keep making the learning plans, keep getting to know them, keep finding out what their goals are. The longer you're with someone, you can kind of get into this comfort in this routine. Okay, guys, awesome. Um, it was great to do this with you. I really hope that you got some value out of it. If you did, if you learned something, if you found this was interesting, just give me a little thumbs up or something in the chat, or just say thanks or just something so I know that you're still here. I really appreciated the opportunity. I hope you get the most out of it. You will be getting this recording later if you're not watching it now. Good, awesome, lots of thumbs up. Thank you, perfect. Yep, you guys are absolutely welcome. Is there anything else, Alitza? Do you anything you want to say, or are we all good here? Okay, all right, guys. Yep, thank you guys very much. Have a good day. Have a good night wherever you happen to be. Okay, guys, have a good one. See ya.